Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
Hey, Dr. Mohamed, how are you this fine day? I understand that we want to talk about value stream mapping versus process mapping. What are your thoughts about these two commonly used tools?
What a great question, John. I've seen a lot in the literature around this topic, and I grew up in a place where value stream mapping was the strategic approach to solving problems. And so when we look at like raising the bar on any problem, or raising the bar on any target, we get a new set of problems. And to understand what that looks like, we have to map out the entire like macro view. And that for me is what I use value stream mapping for. Now, value stream mapping is for me a little bit different than process mapping because it only looks at the perspective of the customer, the product. And so if you put eyes on a piece of metal and it goes through the process, what is the experience of that product versus the experience of the process, which is a little bit different. There's things that we do in the process that are not even visible for the product. And so that doesn't appear for me at the value stream mapping level. And so what usually the way I approach it, because there is still also a relationship between the two in my book, is that value stream mapping allows us to see that customer-centric perspective throughout the entire end-to-end process, through the entire supply chain. And from that, we're able to interrogate this to see where our biggest problems are. From that then comes for me a dissection of that to go into the detailed view to try to understand and diagnose this problem using some type of scientific thinking approach. And during that exploration, to understand it a little bit more, I use process mapping, where now it allows me to understand the more detailed view of what are all the elements, both from a product customer perspective, as well as a business perspective. And so either I use swim lanes for process mapping, or I use or I just kind of just map it all out and put the resources within each box. There's many ways I do process mapping, but I have found that it's nice for me to see that big view of from a customer perspective, and then be able to dive deeper into the details behind that.
Gotcha.
How about you?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I started my journey about 10 years before you started yours, right? We're that much difference in age. And when I started in the late 1980s, there was no value stream mapping, and process mapping was very new. In fact, at General Electric, when I worked there was a group that took Dr. Deming's Out of the Crisis book, and in that book was a very crude process map, is basically credited to being the first process map out there. And so they took that and developed this process mapping tool for General Electric. I wasn't part of the development, but I was part of the group that was asked to critique it before it got launched, and to help develop the training in order to train as many people as we could in how to do process mapping. So then once I went through that and went back to my home division of major appliances at General Electric, I was then asked to train all the leaders and all the engineers in how to do process mapping. So of course, process mapping is very close to me, and it's my favorite tool by far. And I have probably either directly participated or, supplementally participated in, probably 50 or more process maps in my career. So I love it. I love process mapping. And then a few years later, value stream mapping popped up. And the way I kind of first describe that to people, because there's a lot of confusion, what's this new tool called value stream mapping, and how is it different than what we've been doing for years with process mapping? And I would just tell them, well, value stream mapping is process mapping on steroids, right? When we do process mapping, we usually start with a very high level process, diagram. Usually the way I facilitate that is if you look at the beginning and the end of the process and described it in 7 steps or less in order to keep it at a very high level, to me, that would be similar, not exactly the same, but similar to the value stream map. And then you add the blocks of information you see on a value stream map, as far as, how many workers does it take, the changeover times, the quality yields, those kinds of things. And then the line at the bottom to differentiate value added versus non-value added time and the total time. So it's kind of like, well, it's still process mapping, but with just some extra stuff on it. Now, it's not exactly that, but that's kind of how you'd have to describe it, because there was a lot of confusion. Now, like I said, process mapping is my favorite tool. And if done correctly, it's amazing what you can accomplish. I always tell people that I'm training, you want to process map ugly. You don't want a nice, pristine map. You want one that really is reflective of not only the major steps in the process, but all of those hidden steps, all those things that occur when certain things go wrong, right? Oh, we run out of material at this step. Okay, what additional steps does that drive? Well, let's capture that, because if that's happening frequently, that's part of the process. And that might help to explain why the process is always behind schedule, because they're constantly running out of parts. Oh, well, then that's when you get those aha moments, where people see this really ugly map and see all these steps and all these arrows. And it's like, dang, this is a mess. We need to change. That's the key here is when you get to the point where they see this map, anybody, that walks into the room and sees this just big pile of garbage up on the wall and goes, wow, we really are a mess. And that's the first step for making improvement happening, right? Is to admit that you've got a problem, admit that you've got a situation. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, how can we fix this? How can we change the process, not the people? Before process mapping, when things went wrong, first thing you do is blame the people or blame the lack of training of people. But once you get the process mapped out, then all of a sudden it becomes clear that no one could do this. No one could. This is such a messed up process that even Einstein himself wouldn't be able to run this thing. So let's fix the process. So I understand there's a time and place for value stream mapping, but I'm a process mapping guy.
So I have 2 follow-up questions to something that you just said. The first one is that you said your macro view of those 7 steps or less to kind of keep you at an elevation in the process. You said that has both data boxes and a lead time ladder.
No, I'm saying that if you added the data boxes and the line at the bottom, then you're pretty close to what a value stream map would look like.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, the reason we do the high level map first, the macro level map first, is because once you start digging into the details, you may discover that of those 7 high level steps, you really only need to take 1 or 2 of those and dig it down into the detailed steps.
Gotcha.
Because it depends on, where the problem is. Now, I actually lean more towards doing details of all 7 steps, because sometimes the root of the problem has nothing to do with the step where the problem shows up. It has something to do with something that happened 2 or 3 or 4 steps earlier.
That's true.
So when I facilitate, I tend to, lean towards doing a detailed map of all 7 steps, unless it's crystal clear that the problem is only in, 1 or 2 of the steps. And then you just take those down into details.
So when you interrogate, do you interrogate the macro view first to understand which ones to detail, or do you how do you know what's the what precedes what for the interrogation to start?
Yeah. So like I said, when I'm facilitating, there's a very high probability that we're going to do details of all the steps.
Oh.
And then by having those 7 macro level steps, very high level, it also then helps you to better utilize your resources on the team. First of all, first question is there someone on the team that represents each of those 7 macro steps? And if not, then you've got to stop the meeting and pull in some additional resources to help you out, because you don't want to guess. You've got to get people that really do the process, because they're the only ones that know what really happens.
Mhm.
And then what I'll do again to facilitate this is say, okay, you 2 represent the first step. Here's some Post-it notes. You know, put up on the wall what you think are the major steps of the first level of detail for that particular macro step. And then you 2 work on this and you 2 work on that, and so forth, all the way through all 7. Now, keep in mind, that's only once you've done the detailed map,
Mhm.
that's only the 3rd step out of 7. The step that I think most organizations do a poor job of, or don't do at all, is step number 4, which is, all right, once you've got the first level of detail, asking the question, a really simple question, right? What could go wrong at each of these steps? And if it does go wrong, what additional steps does that generate on the process? That's when the map really starts getting ugly. Now, the other
Yeah.
thing you can do is actually go out and spend time observing the process, right? Go to the Gemba
Mhm.
and watch it. And then you're like, wait a minute, did that machine just break down? Yeah, it did. It stopped. Does that happen very often? Oh, yeah, once or twice an hour. Is that on our map? No, let's go back and put it on the map, because that's part of the process. And when the
Mhm.
machine breaks down, what do you have to do? Oh, we have to call maintenance, and we have to wait for them to get here, and then they have to reset the motherboard, and then and we hope and pray that it starts back up, and then the line takes off again. Oh, well, every one of those steps is a waste of time and a non-value added step. We got to capture it on the
Yeah.
process. So again, a process map that's well facilitated is extraordinarily powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate what you're saying. I have one more follow-up question, and then I want to add a few comments to what you just said. Is
Okay.
that macro view, is there any is it from the product's perspective, or is it just the steps at the high level? And is there any information flow that accompanies that, or is it just plainly the manufacturing process?
So that's where this would be different, I think, than from value stream mapping, is that no, this is still process focused. So
Okay.
it's basically, okay,
Material flow.
yeah. So where does the process begin? Where does it end? And then what are those 7 high level steps associated with the process?
Yeah. Okay. And regardless if the material sees it or not, what are just the high level steps?
Right, exactly. And
Okay.
then as far as, supplemental things like information flows and things like that, you can either treat that as part of the process or as inputs to the process, right? Where does the schedule come into play? Okay, it's introduced here. Well, then that would be an input to that particular macro step.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So I think there's agreement here that it's useful to do a macro step and a detail step. I
Now,
think
wait, just real quick, one point on that, because I get this a lot in the training, right? I get asked a lot, how much detail should the detailed level have? And you probably know the answer, right? Enough to solve the problem.
Yep.
Because if you get into too much detail, then you're wasting a lot of people's valuable time. And I kid you not, Mohamed, one time I was asked to help a team that was struggling, and they'd been working on their process map for days. And again, if you're a good facilitator and you have the right team, you can put a process map together in a few hours, not days.
Mhm.
Well, they'd been at this for days. And I walked into the room and the wall was covered in Post-it notes. I mean, probably several hundred Post-it notes.
Mhm.
And I started looking at them, and I kid you not, there was a Post-it note that said, pick up pen. Another one that said, take cap off of pen. Another one that said, put pen to paper. Another one that said, sign your signature on the paper. And I was like, this is ridiculous, and we basically wiped the whole thing off and started over again. And in a couple of hours, we had the process mapped. So yeah, you don't want to go into too much detail on the detailed side, enough to solve the problem and enough to, get that wow factor, but too much and it's overwhelming.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to add a few things to what you just said. I think I grew up being introduced first to value stream mapping. So that's my baseline of how I think. And so one of the things I've noticed, if I just jump into the details without seeing that macro view, is I don't know where I'm solving. I have to map the whole thing out. Well, mapping the whole thing out points to something that you just said. At what level in the details am I doing? So am I doing, the issue is, I'll use in a primary care office, is the issue patient prep and vitals, or is the issue the vitals itself, or is the issue doing the blood pressure? And so if the issue is doing the blood pressure, then I could say, you know what, put the cuff on, pump the cuff, take the reading, input into the computer. That's the level that I need to stay at. But if the issue is vital signs, then I could say, you know what, temperature, pulse, blood pressure, EKG if it's needed, and height and weight or something like that, and stay at that level. Or if the issue is patient prep and vitals, I might say, take demographics, update prescription, do vitals. And so without knowing at the macro level what the problem is I'm trying to solve, I don't know what level to dig into. And
So,
so I found that
you know,
useful for me.
yeah, what kind of went through my mind as you were ticking through that is that, see, as a facilitator for that, where I would go is at what level can we start to identify what can go wrong?
Mhm.
Right? So doing a EKG, right? What could go wrong with just that simple step? Well, we don't have access to the equipment. Someone else is using it. Okay, well, now that's a decision point on the process map. Is the EKG equipment available? Yes or no?
Oh,
No. All right, now we have to go search the hospital for the EKG equipment, and that's all wasted time and
yeah.
effort.
So the details of, putting the leads on and all that are irrelevant because the issue is not there. The issue is we don't have the EKG machine. And
Exactly.
so,
Or if it is the leads, maybe there's another decision that says, are the leads available? Or do they stick properly to the
right.
patient? And we now get a false reading and we're having to redo it because the leads aren't aren't sticking properly.
So now
So
I don't need to map out the vital signs. All I need to map out is the details of the EKG process.
if that's where your biggest issues
Problems.
are, right?
Yeah. And so I think for me, having the ability to see that macro level to say, hey, there's a long lead time of doing patient prep. Why? Okay, let's pull that out and understand the why and dig into it. And from there, understand what's the process look like, where's the biggest the issue. And from that root cause, or from that, I understand where do I need to drill to get to the root cause.
Exactly. Because I tell you, one of my favorite questions when we do get to that yes, no decision point is what percentage of the time would you, as a group of nurses, say that the answer to that is no, like it's not available?
Mhm.
And if they come back and say, 90% of the time, boom, now you've got that aha moment where you're like, okay, now we know why it takes so long to get the vitals, because the equipment's not easily accessible, or it's hard to find. All right, well, maybe we need to have a standardized place marked out on the floor where the EKG equipment always goes back to, so it takes all the guesswork of where it is. Oh,
Yeah.
there you go. So yeah, I love those aha moments. Well,
Yeah.
hey, this was a great discussion, and there's some more topics that we could definitely dig into, and maybe that'll be for a future podcast. But I can see now, I'm a process mapping guy, you're a value stream guy, but that's all right because both tools are needed at certain points. So we'll talk again next week, Mohamed. Have a good week.
You too, John.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.